It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting through my website, emailrevealer.com. You can just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. If you like our show, be sure and check out our Patreon, where we take all the shows you hear Monday to Friday, AM/FM radio. We cut out all the ads, all the commercials, all the nonsense, things you don't like to hear, and we put it up on there for Patreon for our members. But check out the Patreon anyway, Opperman Report Patreon, because there's a lot of free content I put up there all the time. As a matter of fact, I should put up that new Madison Cawthorn video. I should put that up in the free section. That just popped up last night and making a big stir. If you like our show, check out the archives. You can go to Spreaker.com. Check out the archives. It's free. There's a chat room. You get an email notification anytime we put up new content. And also, too, you can find our guest today, Mark G. Hewitt. We've had him on before talking about the Zodiac, hunted the Zodiac murders and exposed the Zodiac revealed. So we've had him on to talk about that. And you can find the archives, Mark G. Hewitt, up there on Spreaker. Mr. Hewitt, are you there?
I am.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. And it's been short notice, too. So we're going to be talking about Charles Manson today. Charles Manson behind bars, the crazy antics and amazing revelations of America's icon of evil. But before we get into the icon of evil, let's talk about Mr. Mark G. Hewitt. Who is Mark G. Hewitt?
Hey, well, thank you for having me on today, Ed. I really appreciate it. I am a true crime author and researcher. I am fascinated with the case of the Zodiac serial killer. I have written a trilogy on that. Prior to writing that, I wrote this book, Charles Manson Behind Bars. So I'm fascinated by many different true crime stories, and I'm continually researching into numerous ones. I'm happy to be here today with you.
Okay, so that's interesting. So you're at the Manson one first. Okay. You know what? How about for our audience that's been under a rock, doesn't know who Charles Manson is? Why don't you give us an idea who Charles Manson was?
Well, Charles Manson is one of the fascinating icons of the United States 1960s. He became a central figure in the news for months on end. At the time, his trial in 1971 was the longest trial that took place in California. It has since been superseded by other trials, but it was almost daily headlines. It was the O.J. Simpson case of much earlier. Manson was famous for, well, I suppose for being an inmate. He was incarcerated in one form or another for as much as 90% of his life. He was involved in reform schools. He was involved in Boys Town, detention centers, and ultimately prison. He was released from prison in 1968, I believe it was. And at that time, he got out, and he was a very worldly, wise man, a lot of street smarts. And at the same time, California was blowing up with hippies and the whole counterculture movement. And he fit in there quite easily. He went around presenting himself as a guru, and he would talk to anybody who would listen to him. He assembled his family. He's known for being the head of the Manson family. He gathered a number of girls around him, later adding guys as well. At times, the family grew to as many as 30 people. And on 2 nights of absolute carnage, he sent followers to go to the Tate residence and slaughter everybody who was there. And then the following night, he sent followers to the LaBianca family, where a couple was killed. It was very gruesome because the crime scenes were very bloody. They used guns. They used knives. They used even a long kitchen fork. there's a lot of, I want to be sensitive to the audience because I know there's a lot of different views on Manson's involvement in those 2 nights of crime. But he was ultimately tried and convicted in court for attempted murder and involvement in murder as well. He was sentenced to death along with a number of the other members of the Manson family. But a year later, the California Supreme Court overturned the death penalty in California, so all of their sentences were commuted to life in prison. So following his arrest in 1969, he spent the rest of his days in one prison or another within California and ultimately died just a few years ago. So in a nutshell, that is his life.
You know, it's funny you mentioned the OJ trial because there is a connection, in the OJ trial, the limo driver, his mother was the appellate attorney for Leslie Van Houten.
I did not know that.
I know, nobody knows. A small world, small world. So now, I guess, how did you get involved with this whole story with Manson in prison? Was it because you somehow hooked up with this guy named Willie Mendez? Is that how it started?
Well, it actually started before that.
Okay.
The first book I ever published was a self-help book entitled Yes, I Can Change. And in the process of publicizing it, I did some brainstorming of how I could reach a wider audience. It was before the days of the internet, before the popularity of true crime and the resurgence of the internet later on. I came up with this idea of reaching out to inmates in prison. I realized that if I could get a high-profile inmate to read my book and enact changes in their life, my goodness, I would become the next Dr. Phil. So I got a list of any inmates that I could get a hold of and sent letters to everybody I could think of. And one of the people that I wrote a letter to was Charles Manson. But of course, I wasn't expecting a reply because I knew that at one point in his history, probably back in the 70s and 80s, he was the inmate in the United States who received the most mail. So I sent this letter and forgot about it. And several weeks later, I reached into my mailbox and pulled out a letter from Charles Manson himself with his signature on the envelope. It was written over with a swastika. And I opened it up, and there were 5 separate pieces of paper in it, and it was hard to tell which piece of paper led to which piece of paper. And they were small enough so that some of the pages only had, just a few words on it. It wasn't really a full letter. It was just, well, whatever. But it was very exciting to receive. I was quite shocked to have that in my hands. So I wrote him back, and we corresponded for a little bit. One of the notes that I got in that first letter had a note on the back of the piece of paper that was scratched out, and it was just some quick note signed Boxcar. And I didn't think much of it at the time, but Manson and I ended up not writing one another. He asked me not to write him back at one point. About a year after that, I received a letter from a different prison cell, from a different prison in California, and a man by the name of Willie Mendez or Guillermo Mendez sent me a letter, said, I got your name and address from Charlie and wanted to reach out to you and blah, blah, blah. Now, I had been told previously that if you receive a letter from an inmate after sending a letter to Charles Manson, do not respond to it because it's somebody just trying to scam you out of something. Mm-hmm. But I was at least intrigued, so I wrote him back, and one of the things that Manson had said to me earlier was, you remind me of my cell, the guy in the next cell to me named Boxcar. He has a very optimistic outlook on life, and you have a very optimistic outlook on life, and I'm not as optimistic as you two are. So when I received this letter from Willie, I wrote him back and I said, are you also known as Boxcar? And sure enough, when he wrote me back, he said, yeah, that's my nickname. One of my nicknames is Boxcar. So we began corresponding a little bit, and I asked him about Manson and how he was doing and what he knew about Manson and what his experiences were, etc. And Willie started telling me stories that I knew were unavailable anywhere else. He was telling me about intimate conversations that he had with Charles Manson, about some of the things that he'd been doing and saying on the tier. So after not too long, I said to Willie, we got to write this down. We ought to publish a book on this. I had never been interested in true crime writing to that point. I was interested in writing on other topics such as self-help, but I thought this was way too interesting to let go. So he got very excited about it. He started sending me page upon page upon page of stories and reflections and memories and quotes, all from Manson. And I was a little bit overwhelmed by the amount of stuff that he sent me. Some of his writing was so tiny that I could barely read it.
When you get mail, especially in the old days, because you're not going to have JPay and stuff like that, it's a little different. But when you would get mail from prison in the old days, they would squeeze in, like in a regular line, they would try and fill in 3 lines because the paper's a commodity, it's tough to get paper in jail. But now, did you give them your real home address, or did you have a P.O. box set up? What was that like?
I gave them my real home address.
God, man.
And I wrote to a number of other high-profile criminals too, including Kenneth Bianchi, the Hillside Strangler, Arthur Shawcross, the Butcher of Rochester, I think they called him, and others. And my mailman was very interested in a lot of the replies I was getting. And he said to me one day, "Boy, you get a lot of interesting mail." Of course, he couldn't ask me about any of the mail I got because I guess he's under federal laws about discussing that kind of thing. But he could say, "You get a lot of interesting mail," but I didn't follow up with the conversation with him.
Yeah, because sometimes, too, they draw on the outside of the envelope, so they'll write things on the outside. It's really creepy stuff, man. And what about, were you concerned, too, about did you wear gloves? Because the cleanliness of the paper and stuff like that? Because, it's filthy in there.
I never even thought of that.
Oh, my God, dude. I love you. Now, what about phone calls? Were they giving you were they making phone calls to your house, too?
I need to go get a tetanus shot.
Yeah, are you kidding me? Yeah.
No, they never didn't. I tried to make some phone calls with Willie, but we were never able to connect on that.
What about any of the other guys?
No, the other guys never did. And
when's the last time you had communications with anybody in prison?
I've continued to this date my conversations with Willie. I haven't heard from them yet this year, but I heard from them at the end of last year.
Okay.
So we continue to correspond.
Now, I had heard through the grapevine that toward the end there that Manson had a cell phone.
Yes.
You heard that too? Okay.
There are places on the internet where some of his recordings, some of his conversations are recorded.
Yeah, fascinating.
I've actually heard them. Yeah, cell phones are one of the things that are available in prison if you have connections.
Oh, yeah, nowadays it's really common, Okay. Now, so first of all, what was Willie in for?
Willie was in for something like 13 felonies, including armed robbery and attempted murder. So he was essentially a lifer. He continues to be in under the 3 strikes you're out law.
Yeah.
He's trying to get it overturned. He's trying to get parole because a lot of inmates are being released in California because of overcrowding and because of court orders. But to date, he's still in prison.
Yeah, we just had a client that was released after 8 years, and he's barely out 6 months, and his apartment burned down. He lost everything again. It's just some people just have no luck, just no luck. Now, yeah, right. Now, what about? Did you ever have any consequences, any difficulties or problems with these guys having your phone number and your address?
I did not. It caused concern for family members.
Yeah.
And other people asked me about it, but I never had any problems. I was very professional and very firm. I set firm boundaries whenever I talked to any of these individuals. So I think they quickly realized that I wasn't somebody that was going to be pushed around. So that may have had something to do with it.
Okay, so you never made any 3-way phone calls or anything like that?
No.
Not once?
I did get other mail from people located with Manson and corresponded with one for 6 months or a year. But that relationship went nowhere, and found out he was just asking for stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, because you can sell that. You can sell, hey, this guy wants to be a pen pal, and who wants to talk to him, And you can sell that kind of stuff. Now, what about, what did Willie Mendez tell you about Charles Manson?
in a word, in a sentence?
No, let's little by little. When you first started talking to him, what's the first thing he told you about?
Oh, just that he got very close to him.
Yeah.
He lived beside Manson for over a year, and where they were situated, there was one person per cell, so that was solitary, but they did have contact between cells. He told me about his transfer to that prison in Corcoran. He told me about coming on the tier and being informed that Manson was on the tier, and then the guy next to him said, "Yeah, I'm Charles Manson." Willie didn't believe it at first. He didn't trust anybody. He didn't know if somebody was just punking him and saying, "Oh, I'm Charles Manson," you know. But the next day when he went to the shower, walked by the cell, looked in, sure enough, there was Manson. By that time, he was already old and gray and very weak and frail. So it wasn't somebody he was really scared of at any point. And yet he still had the fiery temper and the boastfulness and all that he was known for in his younger days.
Yeah, plus he has so much notoriety and so much juice, a guy like that, because people are obsessed with him. Now, we had talked a little bit off the air about Manson's time in Boys Town. What did he have to say about his time in juvenile detention in Boys Town, stuff like that?
He boasted to Willie that he escaped from every place that he was put in. So he would steal a car and run off, or he would get together with a couple other guys and walk away from whatever facility he was in. They weren't good experiences for him. I learned elsewhere that he claimed that he had been raped by a couple of boys at least one of these places. Willie never fed any information to me on that, but this was from my separate reading. He always blamed his mother for a lot of his childhood problems. He claimed that he had been sold to somebody for a pitcher of beer at one point. He claimed that his mother ran around with a lot of guys, or his mother was into prostitution. In fact, Willie told me that as well, that he, as he was growing up, he was meeting all of these guys, and all of them he was supposed to call Uncle John. Here's Uncle John. And then the next week there'd be another guy there. Oh, this is Uncle John. So it was a little bit confusing relationship-wise. How much of that is true is hard to say, because supposedly Manson's mother had a very different tale, saying that Charlie was very difficult to deal with even as a child. And there are stories of him as a elementary school kid conning other students at school, making stories, telling boasts, manipulating other people. So there may have been something genetic there, and it didn't have to do with his upbringing. So a lot of the stories of his youth may be entirely fabricated. We don't know.
Now, and you mentioned in the book, in the description on Amazon, and by the way, I got great reviews on Amazon, that he would wear girls' clothing to school as a child. Well, what's the story behind that?
Yeah, he claimed that at one of the places that he lived, and I believe it was with an uncle. He was sent to live with an uncle for a while, and this uncle was, in Charlie's opinion, was abusive and threatened him and punished him and whatnot. But one day, he forced Charlie to go to school wearing a red dress, and of course Charlie got picked on for it. And again, whether that story is true or not, it's something that Charlie told. I don't know if there's been any corroboration with anybody else.
And what else did Willie have to say?
Well, he talked a little bit about Charlie's philosophy. Charlie was really into what's known as ATWA, A-T-W-A, air, trees, water, animals. So he presented himself as somebody who had a real concern for nature. In fact, when I wrote Charlie, and I asked him about his ideas on change, he said all changes that are taking place are bad. That human beings are just filling the world with pee and poo. Where he used much more colorful terms, but that's basically his idea of human beings. I don't know. I think on some level he did believe that himself, but knowing him and how he reacted to other people, I think it was a very manipulative attempt at gaining followers and appealing to people and taking blame off of himself. Because whenever anybody looked at him and said, why did you do this? Why did you do this? His response was always, well, look what you're doing. I didn't make these children, I didn't make these followers of mine do anything. They did it on their own. I was just trying to help them. These are people who are the rejects of society, and society isn't taking care of its people, and so I had to come in and help. So he always pictured himself and presented himself as a good guy, a person who's there to help, and a person who cares about the wildlife and cares about other people. But when you take a more objective look at who he was and what he stood for, I think a lot of that comes under question.
Now, did he ever discuss the actual murders and what, if he's saying that he wasn't responsible for the murders, did he ever have an explanation for the motives of the actual murderers, the people who were actually there? Did he ever describe what their motives could have been?
Willie was kind of vague to me in what he did say, what Charlie said about those 2 nights, but he did, again, reiterate that he had no responsibility, that he did not order these killings, he did not send people. He blamed drugs, he blamed which incidentally, he was the one who was giving all of his followers drugs and making them take them. He was using a number of different cult tactics, lack of sleep, domination, psychotropic drugs, various things to take control of his followers. And while he supplied them with drugs, he wouldn't take the drugs, or he wouldn't take as much of the drugs as he gave his followers. So he blamed the drugs that he was giving them, and he said that they decided to do what they wanted to do. That was entirely up to them. So, again, he's not taking responsibility for it.
Any indication of where or how he learned these mind control techniques?
Yeah, he spent a lot of time in prison before his 1969, the events of 1969. And while he was in prison, he did a very good job of sucking up to other people and finding out people who had skills and had abilities in controlling other people. So he learned a lot of hypnotic strategies, learned how to hypnotize from a hypnotist he met behind bars. He did study into Scientology. He even interacted with a lot of Christians so he could quote the Bible and take care of people that way.
Now, you said that he studied Scientology. And what period of time was this? This is while Willie was in contact with him? He was still studying Scientology, or this was earlier?
This was much earlier. This was mid-1960s.
Gotcha. Now, what about, did Willie mention anything about cult activity, the Process Church, or any kind of Satanism or anything like that?
He said that he had some contact with it, but he'd never elaborated on it.
Okay. And well, how did you ask him? How did the topic come up, and what did Willie say?
I asked him about what type of contacts he had, what type of people he spent time with. And he did say that he was involved in, I don't know, as I say, he was very vague and not specific at all.
And it's interesting. Go ahead.
He talked about being involved in with a group of Native Americans in at least one prison, and was made an honorary member of their tribe and was included in one of their sweat lodges, so that he was given an awful lot of responsibility. And the way he worded it is because he was because of his concern for nature, his concern for animals and the environment, that they felt like he was a brother of his, a brother of theirs.
Okay, now what about any other cult activity, any other cults, or you know what I mean, followers, groupies, that kind of thing?
That he was involved in, I'm not aware of.
That Manson had. Well, did he have groupies sending him fan mail and photographs and coming to visit him and stuff like that?
Oh yeah,
yeah.
His groupies, yeah, absolutely. He had a group of people surrounding him, even as when Willie knew him. He had people sending him money. He received bags and bags of mail every day. From a wide range of people looking for money, looking for a number of people wanted them to join their cult, or they wanted him to join their church, become a Christian, and then help them proselytize. There were rock and roll groups and heavy metal groups writing to him requesting lyrics for a next song. So there were a lot of people surrounding him. And then I also learned that there were a number of Manson followers who were living nearby, near Corcoran Prison, so that they could be close to him. And they had agreed to be involved in sorting his mail and updating his websites, et cetera, being press contacts and whatnot. In fact, I knew a Rolling Stone writer who wrote an article on Manson a number of years ago, maybe a decade ago, and he went to stay with these friends of Manson back there. And what I found very interesting is that after Manson passed away, a lot of these followers transferred their allegiance and their time over to Scott Peterson.
Oh, really?
Suddenly Scott Peterson is getting all kinds of money. The latest I heard, that Scott Peterson was getting something like $10,000 to $15,000 a week from supporters and fans, but that about half of it was going to inmates within prison for his protection. Different gangs had to protect him.
I can believe that. Now, but you're saying it was the same people, the people who first supported Manson, then switched over and started paying Peterson?
Correct.
Whoa, I wonder why. Any idea why?
All I can guess is that there's something about those individuals that they need to follow, or they're fascinated by true crime, or they feel like they need to support somebody who's very high profile and very dangerous. I don't know.
Interesting that both of their crimes involve pregnant women. That's kind of the connection there, right?
Interesting.
We're talking to our guest today, Mark G. Hewitt, and the book is Charles Manson, Behind Bars, The Crazy Antics and Amazing Revelations of America's Icon of Evil. Now, you could find Mr. Dr. Hewitt at drhewitt.com, D-O-C-T-O-R, Hewitt, Hewitt.com. You can find him on Facebook at Mark G. Hewitt. He's written a couple of books about Zodiac, too. We've got a third one in the works, Hunted the Zodiac Murders and Exposed the Zodiac Revealed. You can go to our archives on Spreaker and find our first interview we did with him about the Zodiac, which was a very popular interview. Let's see. Well, we're talking about Mr. Manson there. Oh, how about this? Now, when he was on the outside, before he got arrested, he was involved. Everybody thinks he's out there in the desert and he's doing buggies and stuff like that, you know. But he had was involved with a business, an escort service, and I believe it was called Star Entertainment or Star Escorts or something like that. Any information about his life as a pimp and a procurer of women?
I have no information on him being involved in any specific company or naming a company, but I know he was very involved in prostitution.
Right.
He was involved in that even prior to going to prison. It was the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s. He was involved in prostitution, even as a very young man. I guess it's something that he learned in the underworld of some of the cities that he had been to. Apparently his mother moved quite frequently, and so they spent time in various places like Indianapolis and Cincinnati. So he seems to have picked up a lot of criminal elements, criminal activities, and spent time learning how to steal cars and fence them, learning how to set up prostitution rings, etc. When he came to California, following his release from prison in the mid '60s, late '60s, he did begin to collect members of his Manson family, and he prostituted them in one way or another. He tried to get several of them working at a strip bar, but apparently they weren't good looking enough to be of interest to the people who owned the strip bars. When he went to Spahn Ranch and got permission from George Spahn to live on this ranch, which he and his family basically moved in and took over, he supplied women, particularly Lynette Squeaky supplied her to George, who was about 80 years old at the time. But she agreed to take care of him and provide sexual favors and kind of do that in a means of manipulating him and controlling him and being in the know of what was going on at the ranch between George and other people, so that he knew that he was safe, or whether he was safe or not. So I think prostitution was something involved in Manson much of his criminal career on the outside.
Did Manson ever discuss with Mr. Boxcar Willie Mendez about his contact with celebrities such as the Beach Boys and Doris Day's son and that kind of stuff?
Not to a great degree, but he did talk about getting to know the Beach Boys and blamed them for ripping off his music and recording at least one song that was inspired by him. He was also upset with Guns N' Roses for doing music the way that he claims he had figured out a way to do music and a way to present rock and roll, and he believed that other people stole his ideas, and Guns N' Roses apparently was one of the groups that he was blaming for stealing his ideas.
You had something else?
No, that's...
Now, did he describe how he came into contact with these people? Because he kind of claims that they came to him.
There's different stories that I've heard. I didn't get anything directly from Willie and anything that Manson claimed about that, but supposedly a couple of girls hitchhiked and were picked up by one of the Beach Boys. It may sound better for him to say that they came to him. Supposedly he was invited over to one of the Beach Boys' homes, and he basically moved in with his girls and his family. They kind of squatted at his home, wrecked one of his cars, and ended up getting kicked out of the home because all the damage that they had done and the food they had eaten and whatnot. It's estimated that they cost him something like $100,000.
No.
But he had hopes of recording with the Beach Boys, but of course that never happened. But the Beach Boys did take one of the songs and changed some of the words, changed the melody a little bit, and then recorded it.
Right. Now, what about when he was there in the prison? I guess he didn't have access to a guitar or any instruments. I'm sure recently, I don't even now you can't. But was he singing and making music there at the prison?
Not really. Earlier, he claimed that there were times that he was able to get a guitar in prison, and was given permission to either play it in his cell or actually go to a music room and play instruments, but claimed that the Department of Corrections in California cracked down on that, so that he was denied access to instruments.
Did he ever say anything about how Bobby Bouzele managed to do a whole soundtrack for Lucifer's Rising from prison?
I don't know about that.
Fascinating story, though, you know. Now, what about other contraband? I mean, Mendez must have, galore must have. I can imagine the contraband that Charlie was trafficking in there in the prison. Do you know any information about that?
Yes, cells got regularly shaken down. They would take the inmates off of a tier, put them in cages along the side, and go through the cells one at a time, looking for absolutely everything. And there was a wealth of material taken from both Willie and from Charlie. Willie went into great detail with me about how prison alcohol is made. They call it pruno, and it's made with sugar and whatever fruit they can get a hold of, and warm water and fermenting stuff in large plastic bags, and keeping a little bit of stock on hand so that you can you can start another batch with this last little bit. And so apparently when they could get away with it, alcohol flowed quite freely within the prison. Mail was searched. Whenever mail went in or out, it had to go through prison officials who opened everything, and there were quite strict rules on what could and could not be sent. I sent Willie a bubble mailer at one point, and later found out that you're not allowed to send a bubble mailer. You're not allowed to receive that in prison for obvious reasons, I guess, because drugs can be hidden very easily in something like that. So I lost that. Any type of inserts, obviously cash couldn't be sent. And if you send stamps to an inmate, those stamps are taken out and used by the prison, and then the prison puts its own stamps, provides these for the inmates, so that they don't get the actual stamps that you send them. I thought that was interesting, because I'm sure there's a story behind that of putting LSD on a stamp or something.
In the paper, too. They soak it in the paper, and then all you got to do is you spray a little perfume on it. And so then, there's discoloration, stuff like that doesn't cause any suspicion. But so nowadays, it's all JP. You're not allowed to, it's very little mail, any major prisons. A couple of things here I'm looking at here. First of all, one thing. You said that he had crazy behavior, but sometimes profound wisdom. Can you give us a couple of examples of either or?
Wow. Crazy ideas. He was very paranoid. And Willie said that he was classified as a mentally ill inmate. That was his classification laterally, which is hard to tell, because in earlier days he feigned insanity. He would act crazy to manipulate one way or another. My theory is that when he was a younger child involved in these boys' town or with other group homes or other types of confinement, he would act crazy because he was very small. He was only about 5'2" or 5'3". He was very slight, and so he got picked on because he was so little.
Sure.
The way that he escaped being picked on was by acting crazy. So laterally, after spending most of his entire life in prison, he actually did become quite crazy. Yeah, interestingly, inmates tend to retain the culture of the world in which they left when they first go to prison. So Manson, being taken out of society in the 1960s, retained to the end of his life a lot of the words and attitudes of the 1960s California. So he would say things like "do you dig it" and "groovy," and those types of things, which sound so antiquated.
Yeah, it is kind of funny when you talk to, and especially nowadays, guys from the 90s, and they go, "Oh yeah, it's hella this or hella that." It's meant, dude. Nobody says hella anymore. Hella. Nobody says that anymore, man. No, I know it's just it's a shame though. Now, a couple of things here. He wore a Ku Klux outfit at one time to stir up trouble.
Yeah, it was kind of an interesting story. It kind of surprised me when I read that, when Willie first presented that to me. He's very good at creating things in his cell. We should talk about some of his artwork that he does in prison. But apparently he put together a Ku Klux Klan outfit, and one day when he was let out of his cell to go for his shower, he walked out along the tier wearing this Ku Klux Klan outfit, meant to enrage, I assume. I can understand, I can't find any other reason to do that but to enrage the African Americans who were on his tier. But at the same time, Willie told me regularly that Manson was very supportive of all people of all races, that he was not racist at all. He cared for all people.
Did he have any affiliations with any prison gangs?
Not directly. He was protected by some. The skinheads liked him, and I assume he paid a lot of money to different gangs for not harming him. And so, but he's a lone wolf. He was a lone wolf his whole life, so I can't imagine him bowing down to anybody.
Now, what was his classification? Was he in maximum security, close custody? Do we know what his status was?
He was in infamous Building 4 at Corcoran State Prison, a segregated housing unit, which means that it had extra guards, extra locks, extra doorways, because these were high-profile inmates who were in great danger by being in prison. So either they were a danger to other prisoners, or other prisoners, the general population, posed a threat to them. Willie was in because, in addition to all of his felonies, he left his gang. He was involved in a gang, and he decided to leave the gang once he went to prison, and therefore a price was put on his head, and his former gang members wanted to off him. So that's why he was in segregated housing unit, plus the fact that he nearly killed an inmate that he was celled with previously. So that's why the inmates were put in one cell per person. Sirhan was on that, was in that building. He may still be to this day, I'm not sure. And
Oh, well, okay, a couple of questions then. Did Willie meet Sirhan?
Oh yeah. He would be involved in passing notes between Sirhan and Manson. That's another thing I found very fascinating.
Go ahead.
In contacting Manson and learning from Boxcar, is how notes were passed between cells and how communication took place on the tier. It's a very regimented society, and everybody's expected to follow the rules or there will be consequences, such as at the end of the day when somebody wants to go to sleep, somebody yells out on the tier, quiet on the tier, going to sleep, and then from that point on, conversations are held at a very low level and there's no loud noises. Every individual cell is their kingdom. You don't mess with somebody else's cell. You don't mess with somebody else's belongings. These people have such little control of their lives that the few possessions that they have, they want to take. They want to guard securely. But on the cell, if somebody wants to pass a note to somebody else, each inmate has what's known as a car, which is a weight with a string attached to it. The weight could be a rock or a piece of metal or whatever, and they will throw this weight across the way or down the hall to a different prison cell, and then attach something to the string, and have that person pull the rock or pull the car and pull the string and receive whatever it was. So one of the first days that Willie was there, Manson threw a car to him, and he pulled it, and on the end of it was an empty chip bag filled with a couple of food items for him as a gift. And so all day long, these cars are being thrown from cell to cell. The other thing, Building 4 has protective, how would I describe this? Like a long, thin tube filled with sand. It was placed in the front of each door of each cell. And these were put there to prevent any type of acid attack or any other type of fluid being
fire. Yeah, they throw fire at each other. Yeah, that flammable liquid on each other. Yeah. Now what about? I'm interested about his communications with Sirhan between Manson and Sirhan, because there is an INS report that I'm in possession of this that describes Sirhan attending drug and sex parties at the Sharon Tate home. And what was the relationship like between Sirhan and Manson?
I have no information on that.
Any way we could find out? You still know these people?
I could ask Willie.
Yeah, ask him. Yeah,
that would be interesting. I tried to ask him about Sirhan, but he was very non-committal and told me very little more than, yes, I helped pass notes, and I talked to Sirhan.
Very interesting. And also, too, now Manson, and that's kind of his status, he doesn't have a job. He's not allowed. And it's just 23 hours a day he's locked in?
Yeah.
Wow.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and when we transport him, wrist and waist and ankle chains?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
oh,
see that, man? What a life. My friend, we're out of time. Fascinating stuff. This is I really recommend this book. People should really check this out. It's called Charles Manson Behind Bars: The Crazy Antics and Amazing Revelations of America's Icon of Evil. The book is written by Mark Hewitt, Dr. Mark Hewitt. You could find him on his website. Let me pull this back up over here. His website is called drhewitt.com, DoctorHewitt.com. You can find him on Facebook at Mark G. Hewitt. If you go on his Amazon, he gives his phone number and his email address. This guy is, I tell you, Mark, I take my hat off to you, man. Giving you these guys your address and your phone number, then you put your phone number on here. I tell you, man, that's really, you're a trusting guy. And what did Manson say about you? That your outlook on life was a positive, what kind of outlook?
I'm an optimistic person.
You are. I agree with Charles Manson. I agree with Charles Manson. You're an optimistic person. And as soon as this next
book...
But
also realize that Charles Manson didn't mess with me, so...
Right. Very good. That's true. That's right. That might give you some cred there. But when this new Zodiac book comes out, I'd love to have you come back and share with us on that, because the two previous books are very well received. Once again, Hunted, the Zodiac Murders, 4.5 stars. And then the other one here, Expose, the Zodiac Revealed. So Mark Hewitt, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night.